Good morning. My name is Kyle Gatlin. I'm senior pastor at the church that you're presently at, or if you're watching online and you don't know where you're at Covenant Methodist Church, just in case you came across us on Facebook or YouTube or something like that and weren't paying attention. I have a question for you today. How much of your life do you remember? How much of your life do you remember? And I know some of you are going like, I don't remember what I did yesterday, right? So think about it. You know, there are people in our world that have eidetic memory. Eidetic memory. Perhaps you've heard of them, Wesley Crusher and Sheldon. Okay, you have no idea who I'm talking about, right? Wesley Crusher was on Star Trek: The Next Generation. Sheldon's on The Big Bang Theory. Both their characters have eidetic memories, which is the ability to remember almost everything like it was a photograph. Remember all the details, all that stuff, right? There are actually people in our history, in the United States and the world history, that they say had an eidetic memory. Leonardo da Vinci was one of those. Nikola Tesla is one of those. C.S. Lewis is one of those. And more recently, it's said, I don't know how this is proven, but they said that Sean McVay, who's the coach of the Los Angeles Rams, the National Football League, has an eidetic memory as it relates to the games and plays. He can remember every play. It's also said that LeBron James can remember every play from a game. Of course, when you get to the fourth quarter, it's easy to remember. Give LeBron the ball, he shoots the ball. I mean, how hard is that to remember, right? So I don't have that, right? I don't have that, but wouldn't it be a blessing and a curse to have that? If you could remember literally everything, if you can remember literally everything in your life, there'd be some things that are great. There are other things going like, I don't want to remember that, but you do. But you do. And honestly, I can't remember everything in my last 57, 58 years. I don't remember everything. And my wife's famous quote is this: it's amazing the things that you do remember, right? And I remember like minute details of something that means nothing. It has absolutely nothing to do with everything. And with anything, and she says, how do you remember that? Anyway, but there are some things that stick out in my past. And unfortunately, they're mistakes that I've made. One of the first biggest mistakes I've made, actually my first biggest mistake was losing 3 kids on a canoe trip overnight. But that was my first big mistake in ministry. But the second big mistake was when I had my own church, and I was in my 5th year at that church, and made a decision. Get this. I made a decision to not be at my church on Christmas Eve, but to travel and head to do something else Christmas Eve. Now, I was told later, pretty pointedly, by the SPR, the personnel committee chair, that was not the wisest choice that I could have made. And understood that, have not missed a Christmas Eve since. And I don't know if it's a coincidence, but I moved the next July to another church. I don't know. I don't know if that was a coincidence or not. In that same church, I also made a mistake that has really changed the way that I treat couples who are getting married. Because in that first church, there was a man getting married for the second time. He had a daughter that was youth age, and I was really involved with the student ministry at that time, and so I was really close to the family. That daughter was really connected to our church, more so than her dad, but the dad grew up in that church. He's getting married for the second time, and I had a very fundamental hardline requirement that I wanted he and his fiance, who I barely knew, I wanted them to do. And he said, we can't do that. And so I refused to marry them at that point. Obviously, they found somebody else to marry them and never set foot in the church as long as I was pastor again, outside the funeral for his dad. So mistakes have sort of stuck out for me. And really, when I try to remember things, I have to concentrate. But there are some times that things will just trigger my mind, smells, events. And actually, even today, just talking about this has triggered a couple more things in my mind that I remember that. I remember that. But our brains are amazingly adapt at remembering things. Do you know we have 2.5 million gigabytes of memory? We have 2.5 million gigabytes of memory that we have access to. Now, if you're like me, that you place your memories in folders and forget what you named them, right? And you can't find them anymore. So maybe that's you. But how do we remember things? How do we remember things? Well, sometimes they are so spectacular or traumatic that they are just literally seared into our minds. Because it was such an amazing thing, right? That we'll never forget that. Whatever that amazing thing is for you, birth of a child, wedding, death, something like that. Some of those things are just, severely seared into our minds. Many of us will never forget where we were September 11th. We'll never forget. I was upstairs over another building when that all went down on September 11th. But there are other things in our minds that are there because of repetition. Because over and over again, we hear them, observe them, or whatever, and we can't forget them. Now, not speaking for everybody in this room or those of you watching online, but if you've been to church a lot in your life, particularly if you grew up in a traditional church, you knew the Lord's Prayer. You could recite it because you've been reciting it every week at times. Sometimes multiple times if you grew up in a family that repeated it and taught it. The 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd. Many of us know that one because we've heard it repeated so many times. And if you go to a lot of funerals, you hear it a good bit at funerals too, right? John 3:16 is another one, another verse in the Bible that is repeated over and over again. And you see it broadcast on TV sometimes on banners, and so you people look it up. So those are some of the things that are seared there because of repetition. Many of us in this room, if pressed, if I came to you and said, sing your song, your school's fight song, you could do it because you sang it so many times. Now, if I asked you to sing your high school fight song, maybe not, because I couldn't. I could play my fight song, but I couldn't sing it. I don't remember the words to it. Don't remember my high school alma mater either. But I remember my college fight song. I remember my college alma mater because I sang it over and over again for 4 years. So we remember those things. Most of us can't remember when we didn't know the song Happy Birthday, right? And if you're the modern generation and raising kids right now, you know this. Baby shark do 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 do, baby shark do 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 do. Can't get it out of your mind. Can't get it out of your mind, right? Or if you're the generation where my kids were growing up, I love you, you love me. This song is a misery. Oh. By the way, I do have some videotapes of that. I do not show them to my grandkids, by the way. But I think they have watched some before on YouTube or something like that, right? So some of these things we just have in our memory because of pure repetition. Now, when we get talking about the nation of Israel, okay, the nation of Israel, the people have left slavery for 430 years in Egypt, and they are wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. We call them the wonder years, is what we've titled them for our point today. They're wonder years. They are getting close to the end of their 40 years. They are literally at the brink of entering in the promised land. They're going home to Canaan. And the book of Deuteronomy is written, I believe, to give them last-minute instructions of, okay, when you get to the promised land, this is what you're to do. This is what you got to do this when you enter the promised land, because in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, there's a lot of instructions there, and I think Deuteronomy almost repeats everything. Just repeats it all. Okay? So the last instruction, because we see this repeated over and over again in Deuteronomy, either the word remember or don't forget. Remember or don't forget. Those phrases, phrases, are 26 times in the book of Deuteronomy. And we start out, and I want to break down Deuteronomy 4, verse 9, in 3 different sections real quick before moving on to another passage. Deuteronomy 4:9, only be careful, watch yourselves closely, so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to the children after them. So I want to break this down in 3 parts. The first one is, do not forget the things your eyes have seen. Do not forget what your eyes have seen. How many times have we heard from our parents? Maybe you as a parent has said something like this before. Don't forget to say thank you. Don't forget to call me when you get there, or in most of our cases today, don't forget to text me when you get there. Don't forget to brush your teeth. How many people remember this? Don't forget, wait 30 minutes before swimming. All right? And the famous one, I don't know if any of you use this today, but I did hear this. Don't forget to wear clean underwear, because you might get in a wreck. All right, I've been to the ER a few times, and there's a checklist. They've never asked me once if I had clean underwear. It wasn't there. They asked me what church, what denomination are you? You have insurance. Clean underwear? Where's that? It's not on the box. Where is the clean underwear box? I've been told this all my life. I should be answering this question. You would think the nurse then would pick up, hey, it's not on our checklist, so the nurse should ask me, hey, do you have clean underwear? Right? That hadn't happened yet. Start thinking about that a little bit. Now, if you show up for the ER because you're in an accident, there's a really good chance that there was a second accident after the first accident, which sort of leaves the parents' instructions at that point pretty much moot, right? Right? So don't forget what your eyes have seen. Don't forget what your eyes have seen. That was the command to this nation, to these people who have been wandering for 40 years. Don't forget what your eyes have seen for these 40 years. And do you know what those eyes have seen? I'm going to give you an easy way to remember. Clint Eastwood. Yeah. You have no idea, right? Here it is. The good, the bad, and the ugly. That's how you remember this. That's how you remember what went on in these years. The good and the bad and the ugly. Because in the good, they had a cloud by day for 40 years. They had a fire by night for 40 years. They saw the Red Sea split. They saw water from a rock more than once. They had food on the ground every day for 40 years. They had quail more than you can count. So thick they couldn't even walk through them. So they had all the good there, but they did have the bad. They were doubting God. They wanted to go back to being slaves. They made idols out of gold. There was some ugly. People rebelled against their leaders. They argued with each other. The earth swallowed up a number of people at one point. So there was some good, there was some bad, and there was some ugly. And the thing is that our minds don't easily forget what we've seen. Our minds don't forget. There's some things that we can't unsee. The day before Thanksgiving, 1984, I will not unsee my dad having a heart attack or stroke in his chair. Because I'm the one that found him. I cannot unsee that image of my dad at that point, had no idea what was going on. I said, Mom, something's going on. And I can't unsee that image of my dad in that moment was most likely dead in that chair. And then Mom gave him CPR to no avail. I cannot unsee that. A number of years ago, I officiated a service. And I just remember, this was one of those things I remember just recently, where a young lady was 5 months pregnant and miscarried. And so I'll never unsee that child at that memorial, at that funeral service. I can't unsee it, but it still is okay that I did see it, right? It's okay that I had that experience because it reminded me when I saw this tiny infant that was literally just 5 months in the womb, it was a life. It was a creation, God's creation. I saw that. But I can't unsee that. And there's a lot of things that we can't unsee. And when you look at what the nation of Israel saw during these wander years, they couldn't unsee these things. And they had to weigh then of what they saw in the good that God did versus the bad and ugly that was going on at the same time. And it would be real easy to concentrate on all the bad and the ugly and forget about the good, which is what, I self-admittedly, is what things come back to my mind, right? Those negative things have come back to me. The mistakes seem to come back more than some of the positives in my life. But understand this, the good was very consistent. The good that these people had experienced, the good that they saw was overwhelmingly consistent day in and day out. Food every day. Water when they needed to. You know something else? You find this in Deuteronomy 29:5. During the 40 years, Moses said, during the 40 years I led you through the wilderness, your clothes didn't wear out. A little nuance there that you sort of just gloss over. But it says their clothes didn't wear out for 40 years. And I thought that's amazing, right? Until I remembered my own life. It was 40 years ago. Fall of 1983. Here you go, Robbie. This is my shirt. This is a shirt I bought fall of 1983. That's my fraternity. Robbie, do you still have your shirt? Do you still have your shirt? Yeah, okay. Robbie Nichols was also a fraternity brother a few years after I was at Farmhouse, right? So this shirt, I still have it. Now, it is not in great condition, but it's still wearable. I still can wear this. Yes, it says medium on it, and yes, I can still wear it. I'm not going to model it for you because that would be something you can't unsee, right? So I'm not going to model that for you. But 40-year-old shirt. I was over at my mom's this past week for her 93rd birthday. And something else came to my mind. I was going through a closet. She was asking me to look for something that ended up not being at the house, but I looked for it for like 15 minutes. Oh, I left it at the church. I said, great, that's the 15 minutes of my life. Anyway, so I was looking and I came across this jacket. Got that picture of that jacket? So I put a picture on, took a picture of me wearing it. This was a jacket that we had got when I was in the band in high school. So that's 40 plus years old jacket. And I asked Mom, because I said, I'll bring that over here, right? Because I was just over there. And I said, Mom, do you still wear that jacket? She said, yes, I do. I said, but you can have it. I said, I won't be wearing it, right? But I can wear it. It still fits, sort of. I didn't show you from here down, right? I didn't show. So, a few weeks ago, we were up in Kentucky, going through my mother-in-law's house, cleaning it out, and so my wife came across not something 40 years old, about 35 years old, a jacket that she had in high school. It was the Letterman's jacket, Letterman's sweater, or whatever. It had all these accomplishments on it that they got. Okay, I want to ask y'all a question since my wife is here. So I want to ask you a question. So when you think of Letterman's jacket, don't you think of sports? Is that right? You think of sports, you do sports, you get letter for being in sports. She got like bars for being in chorus, right? That's what's on her jacket. Anyway. But, so she modeled it. And her niece, Alexa, said, that's amazing, Aunt D. That's amazing. And even more amazing, it still fits. So we appreciate our niece giving us some compliments. That is always a good thing. You know, so that's what these Israelites had. No clothes wearing out, food every day, water when they needed. All that stuff was taken care of. So though the good every day. And isn't it tempting for us to take the everyday good for granted? Because I think that's what happened to the Israelites over and over again during their wonder years. I think they took the everyday good for granted. They took that they were getting food every day, that their clothes never wore out, that they had shelter, and they were provided for each and every day. They were taking it for granted. And I think this is just observation, sometimes when sickness or difficult circumstances come our way, we tend to forget the good that has been with us more than often than not. And we concentrate only on the negative. So Deuteronomy says, be careful and keep watch for the good things we have seen. Be careful. Keep a watch out. So you don't forget the good things your eyes have seen. And it said this, or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Don't let them fade from your heart. How does something fade from your heart? How does something fade from your heart? Well, you don't talk about it. You just put it out, put it out of your mind. You don't talk about it. You know, why did that shirt last this long? Why did that shirt last for 40 years? Because I had no reason to wear it. When I was at Auburn, 83 to 87, it was basketball or softball, one game of soccer, tennis, all that stuff. I was wearing that shirt because I was representing the fraternity, was with my fraternity brothers, so I wore it over and over again for whatever we were playing at the time. Parades, walking in parades, all that stuff, I wore it. Right? But once I left, in 87, moved to Kentucky, I lost the reason for wearing it, so that sort of just faded away. That's really why it lasted. Because that sort of just faded from my heart. That portion of my life faded from my heart. Kept in contact with a handful of the guys for the next year. Met up at Tennessee at Neyland Stadium for a football game. But basically after that, it was just one guy from Auburn that I pretty much stayed in contact with in weddings and stuff like that. But that can just happen. It can just fade away. So God knew that this was going to happen. God knew that there was a propensity for us to let things fade away. So what he did, he set this up in Deuteronomy 16. You can go look it up. Deuteronomy 16 reiterates what the Israelites are to do every year so that this would not fade. So what God had done in their lives would not fade. He set up 3 festivals. The first was Passover / Feast of Unleavened Bread. Just to remember that night, that 10th plague came, and the angel of death passed over the Israelites and came upon Egypt, and then boom, they let them go. And then the unleavened bread, don't put leaven in your bread because you're going to be leaving Egypt in a hurry. So they had this one festival, the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, was to commemorate them getting out of Egypt. And then a few weeks later, I think 7 weeks later, they were supposed to have what is called the Festival of Weeks. And that was to commemorate not only the first fruits of the harvest, but also the giving of the law, the 10 Commandments basically, at Mount Sinai. And then the other festival that they're supposed to have every year, everybody commemorates, is the Festival of the Tabernacles. And that's to commemorate the 40 years of wandering. And like for 7 nights, they built temporary booths just like they did for the 40 years in the wilderness where they had to pack up, move, pack up, move, do that. So they had 3 events that they were mandated to celebrate each and every year. Why? So that it would not fade from their memories. So they would recount every year, 3 times a year, some wonderful things that God had done in their lives. You know, one of the reasons that while we have a worship service on Sunday, so what Jesus has done in our life will not fade from our memories. Remember, every Sunday that we come together is literally a mini Easter, M-I-N-I, Easter. We celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ every time we come together. That's what the Christian church does. That's why we have a service on a Sunday. To be reminded of what Jesus has done. So it will not fade from our memory. But there's a third thing that was told to these folks here. Listen to this. Only be careful, watch yourselves closely, so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to the children after them. Teach them to your children. And we pick up this teaching component in Deuteronomy 6:4-9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. And then it goes into what you should do. Right? And so I want to remind you, not only is this about teaching the commandments, but understand that what God had done in their past, what they had seen in their past, that He did not want them to fade. The commandments, the instructions, the laws, everything was tied to what God had done in their lives. So all the events, everything that God had done was also tied to these commandments. So when they were teaching these commandments, He said, teach them to what the commandments, you're teaching them not just the commandments, but why we have the commandments, teaching them why we are doing these things the way that we do them because of what God has done in our lives. So He said, impress them on your children. Impress them on your children. The word impress literally means to teach diligently. Teach diligently. Inherent in that Hebrew word, which I'm not going to pronounce because you don't care what the Hebrew word is. So I'm just going to tell you what the definition is. That definition that we have the word impress in the NIV not only means to teach diligently, it means to sharpen. And if you go to the book of Proverbs, you know that you have a passage that says, iron sharpens iron. Iron sharpens iron. So when you are teaching diligently, you are sharpening not just the person that you're teaching, you're doing it yourself too. You're teaching yourself in the same way. Because those of us that teach regularly, we learn more teaching than probably the person that's hearing, right? There's something about teaching that helps us remember and know it even better the more we teach it. Right? That word impress also in the Hebrew, part of the definition means to pierce. To pierce. And metaphorically, when you're thinking about that, when something pierces us, it affects us deeply. It affects us deeply. And so you can imagine when the writer of Moses is saying, God's saying, teach this. You know who's doing the teaching? About what has gone on and the commandments, most likely the mother and the grandmother. Why do I say that? Because in those 40 wonder years, remember, every male that was over, over 19, every male that was 19 and older that left Egypt did not survive those 40 years. They all died, and they did not get to enter the promised land, just like Moses didn't. So who survived all what God had done in their lives? The mothers and the grandmothers. And they're sharing these stories and they're sharing the commandments. They can share how it affected them deeply. What God had done and how God had been with them all these years and through all these circumstances and through the ups and downs and through the water and the food, all that. And they could share that emotion of how it had pierced them, this experience. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. This is not something they say, okay, schedule one time a day or schedule one day a week to talk about them. No, talk about them all the time. This was part of your everyday language. This was not just a school day language, a class lecture. This was part of everyday language. And it's recognizing, when you're doing this every day, you're recognizing that not only do we have a God of the past, and He's just not the God of the past, but He's the God of the present. He is with us in this moment. Yes, we have this God that has been with us, but I'm telling you this because we're talking about it today because he's still with us today. The same God who led us out of slavery is the same God who is protecting us and providing for us right now. And then they said, the scripture says, tie them on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Tie them as symbols. Okay, this is sort of strange, and it looks even stranger. You want to see this guy? Because he tied something on his head and he wrapped something around his hand. Okay? That seems a little strange, but how many of us in the past have tied a string around our finger to remember something? How many of us wear these plastic bracelets on our wrists? Mine are Pursue God and Unleash Compassion. The other one, my buddy from went to Phil Wickham concert and gave me one that says, I believe. Reminds me of what the mission of our church is, and it reminds me of who I believe in. So that they're there, and for the Orthodox Jews, they literally took this literally. They put little scrolls of the scripture in that little box on the head. I guess they could write real tiny. I couldn't do that. Couldn't read my writing. And then they wrap these things around their wrist because that arm is a symbol of strength, but it's also a symbol of action. So they're understanding that not only do we hear God's word, we got to do something with it. We got to put it into action. That's why that wrapped around their arms remind them to hear God's command, but put it into action as well. All right? And then he says, write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. What happens when you write something down? You won't forget it. Many of us have calendars on our phones. We type it in now so we won't forget what to do with our lives. If I don't put it there, I'll forget it, right? But I remember even as a kid and all the way through college, if I wanted to remember something for a test, I wrote it down. And I wrote it down again, and I wrote it down again. If I like definitions, you get the 25 words. We'll go over the spelling and definition test. I write them suckers down every time. Write it out. Write it out again. Write it out again. Because when I write it down, I will remember. So everything this is built so they won't forget. This is all built in so they won't forget, so it won't fade from their memories of what God has done in their lives. And as we look at this, we go, yeah, they had a lot of content. They had a lot of content of what God had done in their lives. There's no shortage of what God had done during their wonder years. And we also understand this about the Old Testament, just as an aside, right? We understand Jesus came to fulfill the law, not to abandon it, okay? So basically he's saying there are parts of the Old Testament that we know, yeah, Jesus says those parts really don't come into play anymore. Most of that involves the food and the sacrifice stuff. We don't do that anymore. But he didn't do away with it. So particularly when we come to this passage, which I believe is timeless, it endures the test of time and endures what Jesus is talking about, where he's come to fulfill the law. He's not abandoning it. This is one of the things that's not being abandoned, right? And this passage is telling us we talk about what's on our hearts. We talk about what's on our hearts, and we do. You see, what's on our hearts is what we teach. What's on our hearts is what we teach. And depending on the season, we are encouraging our children in baseball or soccer. We're encouraging our children in basketball. Or we're teaching our older children about different things, depending on what's going on in our life: politics, pain, grief. You name it. What's on our heart is what we're teaching. And sometimes it's not what is taught, it's what is caught. But I'm telling you today, If you look at those wonder years Israelites and say, wow, they have amazing content, I don't have anything that amazing to share. Not so fast. You do. You do have a God story to share. Yours may not be the amazing provision of food every morning on your front doorstep. Yours may not be water out of the ground so you can have something to drink every day. But you do have a God story. Where you look back and say, God was there when I didn't know it. In fact, God showed up when I didn't give God a second thought. God put somebody in my path to remind me that He was there. God used a person to help restore my faith in Him. So you just might need to pause and start thinking and trying to remember what God has done in your life. Because here's what I want you to take home. God's past can project our present. God's past can project our present. You see what He did for the Israelites, He still desires to do for you. You see, the reason that God wanted His people to remember what He had done in their life was that was going to continue in the promised land. Remember what I've done for you for all these 40 years? Because I'm still the same God when you enter the promised land. It will just be different. It will be different, but I'm still the same God. God's past is documented. We have it in the Old and New Testament. We have that past documented, and it projects our present. Because what do we find with God? What do we see about God? We see that He never abandoned His people. He protected His people, and He provided for His people. And we have God's Word. We have the Bible, Genesis through Revelation, to remember not just what God did with His chosen people, but what He has done through Jesus Christ. And hopefully when we see what He has done in the past, we understand that He's going to still do that in the present, because Malachi says this, I, the Lord, do not change. Hebrews says, Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. That's who has our backs and has our fronts. Jesus. God in the flesh. You see, when I remember the good and the bad and the ugly. I do. But normally what I remember is my bad and my ugly. But I know this. God's got the good. It's called grace. And it's God's grace that overcomes my bad and ugly every time. And then there's that grace that we remember today as we take the bread and the juice.